also, this is your opportunity to make a connection. My advice is to work in some sort of personal connection, either to the institution, like maybe the institution you're applying for is really strong in an area that really interests you. Maybe if it's a public library, they have a really strong, teen program, and that's what this job is, and you're super excited to join. Or maybe that they have a really strong children's program and you want to mirror that quality in their teen program, or some personal connection that you have. If it's an academic institution, maybe they're particularly strong in something that's a big research interest of yours. Maybe there are people there who are experts in things that you want to learn. Maybe there's a librarian at the institution whose research or activism you admire. Or maybe your connection that you want to highlight is to the geographic area. Like, often these are nationwide job searches, especially for academic libraries. If it's clear from your CV or from when you're entering your location information, your current residence, into some sort of database when you apply for these jobs. So if it's clear that you would be relocating, sometimes saying something about the location that you're suggesting that you move to for this job, like if you've visited there and loved it, or if you're originally from there and want to move back, like those are really compelling things to bring up towards the end of your cover letter. Other things that you can make personal connections to are, look to see if the institution or organization has a blog, or maybe they had a recent event that you could talk about, or maybe you could see that they have an upcoming event that you could go to and say you went there, or perhaps you could use their collections and talk about how you've used their collections and admire them. There are so many ways to create some sort of personal interest that really shows them that you want to work there. I have another little exercise for you. We don't have to take 10 minutes for it. We can only take a few moments, but I'd like you to practice filling a gap or making a connection. So practice writing a few sentences addressing a gap between a job that you might apply for and your work history. Alternatively, you could also write a few sentences making a connection between the institution of your dreams or the job description that you're looking at today and your personal or professional interests. And then, of course, I will address any questions in the chat. So if any of you, oh yes, so Sarah's asking, can you talk about informational interview and using your network to find additional information about a job? Yes, sure. I was trying to keep my presentation kind of closely around resumes and cover letters, but absolutely, well, first of all, networking is its own thing. So if you need to build a professional network, there are strategies for doing that. LinkedIn, Facebook is actually quite big with many librarians. And if you're in an LIS program, of course, there's that. And then also another way to build a network is to join listservs and start getting in on conversations and making connections that way. And then once you have connections with people who are in the kinds of roles that you're interested in, or you can ask people in your network if they're connected to people who are in the kinds of roles you're looking for. As I've gone through my career, my network of people who are in different kinds of library roles has grown and grown. And so, I can be a resource for people in my network who want to talk to somebody who does one kind of job or another. So ask the people in your network to put you in touch with people who are doing the kinds of jobs that you want to do, and ask them questions about it. And also sometimes that can lead to opportunities to do some project work or volunteer work that can help you gain some of the experience that I know some of you were saying that is a challenge for you to get experience. So Abigail's asking, what if the reason for a gap is something personal? That is a really good question, and it's hard to answer that generally. What I've done personally is I was actually not successful in finding a job that would move me home from New York to California. So I quit my job in New York, moved home without a job, and slept in my sister's spare room for 4 months while I looked for work. But during that 4 months, I had negotiated with my former employer. They were so very wonderful that I consulted with them and was and continued to train somebody who was taking over some of the programming that I had developed in that previous job. And so although I wasn't working full time, I was still doing that work, and I was still adjuncting for NYU, also doing chat reference remotely for a while. So I was able to kind of hide those gaps by doing part-time work. And that's actually what helped me kind of hide that weird 4-month job that happened, because that job happened during that same time. And it kind of helped me to hide that gap, which if I'm asked about it, I will absolutely tell the whole story of that specific gap. So that was a personal reason I desperately needed to move home. But there are other kinds of gaps that you may not be as able to, talk about the reason. So Sarah asked, how about volunteering? Are you saying volunteering to bridge a gap? Because that is one of the things that you can do to bridge a gap. Yes, absolutely. Any advice for addressing gaps for having children? So I do think that some of the things that go along with having children, like serving on committees at their schools, chairing those committees, or organizing sports things, or whatever those things might be that you've done, like whether it's, maybe even it's like, organizing, judging for speech tournaments, or whatever those things might be. Those are activities that illustrate soft skills that can be applied to committee work in libraries. And so that's what I would highlight. I don't know that I would mention gaps due to illness. That's another question that just came through on the chat. And the main reason for that is that, especially if you are a protected class, if you have an illness that makes you protected. Sarah put a great link for Ask a Manager and childcare gaps. That's wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. My advice is, in the cover letter, resume, and interview process, do not bring up something that overtly tells the potential employer that you have a protected class kind of condition. And I will say this as someone who has a chronic illness. I have type 1 diabetes. I've had it since I was 11. And it's funny, until I interviewed here at Berkeley, I've successfully been able to hide my diabetes, even during all-day interviews. But some of the wonderful devices that keep me alive these days started beeping throughout the day and malfunctioning during my interview day. And so that totally outed me. But the reason that you don't want to bring those things up during the interview process, if at all possible, is you don't want there to be any question of your candidacy based on that protected class. What the interviewers should do is ignore it, make it not a big deal. If you try to talk about it, they should not talk about it with you. And it should really just be about the qualifications and the candidacy. So my recommendation with illness is, if at all possible, find a spin for a gap that would explain it, that is also true, that is not the illness itself. And that may not be easy to do. And then somebody said working on other skills. So, so explaining a gap by saying that you were working on other skills. So as long as that's true, as long as there's something there that was happening, then absolutely. And professional development, which is what I'm saying with, if you can do webinars, if you can do, volunteer project experience, if you can get a part-time job in a library, if you can get a non-librarian library job to gain some experience, to start to bridge that gap, maybe the more immediate experience would make a gap in the past less troubling for an employer. Okay. So great questions. Oh, thank you. Good advice that Y. Wong has gotten about illness gaps and things that could put me at a disadvantage for the position is to give as little information about it as possible and only when asked. Right. So that's why I think that if possible, have some experience that's more recent that you can talk about. Yes, no need to volunteer information that doesn't actively further your candidacy. That is absolutely true. So that goes back to that same advice that I gave in the beginning from the resume part. When do you spin? When do you omit? And if you can't find a way to spin something into a positive, omit it. So we have gone over, now you have tools and things that you can use to promote your strengths, to analyze job descriptions, tailor your resume, and tell your story, to fill in your gaps and make connections. And so now I would like to know from you, what are your biggest takeaways from today's workshop?